Morning, people. Okay, let's talk about Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, the person who will almost certainly take over when the Tories probably lose the next election. First, let's get this out of the way, because a lot of this video is going to sound like I'm attacking Labour or trying to get you not to vote for Labour, and that is not the point of this video. The point of this video is that while most of us will need to vote for Labour at the next election depending on where we live, our work does not end with the Labour government because Keir Starmer cannot be trusted. So yes, it's not ideal that our path to a better future involves temporarily putting that future in the hands of somebody we don't trust, but this is where we are. And the reason why only 47% of Labour voters trust him compared to 29% who think he's untrustworthy and the rest just don't know, which means he's actually doing slightly better with Lib Dem voters than with Labour voters, is because he doesn't appear to stand for anything. No offence to the Lib Dems, but he's trying to avoid being controversial by aiming right down the centre of UK political ideology. Dead centre, even though he's supposed to be leading a party of the left. And it's not just me saying this, he said it himself.
On climate change, growth, aspiration, levelling up, Brexit, economic responsibility, we are the party of the centre ground.
All the issues he just mentioned are critical to the UK's future. Aiming right down the middle is not how you fix them, because that means you're prioritising being popular over actually leading the country. And I know some of you are thinking, but he needs to win the next election if he's going to do anything, so maybe he has to appeal to Tory voters as well right now, and I'll get to that. But here's why I've only ever trusted him as far as I can throw him, because I've met the guy twice, and on both occasions, he showed me a side of himself that raised major red flags about two of the biggest issues we face. The first time was at a UCL event in 2018, and I explained to him that Labour's Brexit strategy of, again, trying to aim down the middle wouldn't work, because if you leave the EU but keep following the rules of the EU single market, yes, you protect the economy and the millions of working class people in it, which Labour, as the party of the working class, by definition has to do, but we no longer have a seat at the table in deciding those rules, so we'd have less control than we did as members of the EU. And I explained that his Brexit would simply piss off the people who voted for Brexit because they wanted more control. But he kept supporting it for nearly another year, and now his Brexit policy is even worse because he won't even commit to joining the EU single market. And for the people who I know are screaming, oh, but he can't come out against Brexit because the Tories and the Daily Mail will crucify him as a Ramoner. Let me say this really slowly for you. Keir Starmer does not have to support rejoining the EU. He just has to stop lying to people. We've been lied to by our politicians for as long as any of us can remember, and it has to stop. And every time he uses that slogan, make Brexit work, he's lying to us. He's telling you that Brexit is something that can be made a success of, rather than a harm that people should be protected from. And that is a lie. And I don't just mean a lie to the majority of the UK who believe that Brexit is a mistake and therefore will never be a success. It's a lie to the minority who still believe in it, because they wanted to take back control, to have more control over our laws. And anybody who's paid attention to Brexit at all in the last 7 years understands that if the UK has different laws to the EU, then that makes trade more expensive because the extra checks, paperwork and delays that creates at the border. That's the damage that Brexit is doing now. That is the reason why the government's official economists say that Brexit is costing our economy £100 billion a year. Or you keep following the rules of the EU by effectively joining the EU single market, which is the technical term for how EU countries operate as a single marketplace, because they all use the same rules, so anything that's legal in one country is automatically legal to sell across Europe as if you were selling within your own country. But because we've now left the EU, we don't get to vote on EU rules anymore. We used to have 73 of the 750 members of the European Parliament. That's 10%. 3 times the voting weight of the average EU country. Following those rules without being able to influence them anymore would make us objectively less sovereign. So you either give us a Brexit that makes us poorer and raises prices, or you give us a Brexit that does the exact opposite of what people who still want Brexit would consider a success. Neither of those options will make anyone think that Brexit has worked, so by saying he'll make Brexit work, he is lying to the country. And for the record, not lying to the country is the absolute bare minimum. If he actually wanted to be honest, he would say Brexit is a historic mistake and we need to start working to undo it ASAP. And I know that's not realistic, but what could he realistically do? Let the people affected by Brexit speak for him. Can you imagine if the leader of the opposition put out a video every week of them sitting down with one of the people hurt by Brexit and simply asked them, hey, how have things been since we left the EU single market, and what do you need for your business to survive? For example, he could speak to the owners of the 56% of UK businesses that say that Brexit has made their lives harder, or the 1 in 5 small businesses that have had to stop selling to the EU altogether, and he wouldn't have to say a damn thing himself. But ideally, he'd finish the videos by saying something along the lines of, I don't care about Remain or Leave. I don't think that a vote from 2 general elections, 5 prime ministers, and the better part of a decade ago should decide whether people are suffering today, especially during a cost of living crisis. So as prime minister, I will will listen to the people of the UK and I won't stand for anything that's hurting them, and I'll do whatever it takes. If that means making UK rules compatible with EU rules to lower the cost of living and business, then that's what I'll do. And what can the Tories even say to that? Because in order to argue against it, they'd have to admit that they're hurting people during a cost of living crisis. And here's how that would go. See, Labour are finally showing their true colours. They want to overturn the will of the British people. If you vote for them, they'll betray you all. You guys are stuck in the 2010s. It's 2023. It's not about leave and remain. We've left. We've followed the will of the British people. But unlike the Conservatives, those of us on this side of Parliament want to keep following the will of the British people. That's why we've been listening to them. And they're in pain, so I want to make their lives easier. I want to help them beat the cost of living crisis, because that is the will of the British people in 2023. Instead, what do we get?
We're not going back into the EU, not going back into the single market, customs union or freedom of movement.
We have to make Brexit work.
The second time I met him was during the 2019 election. I did a video with him to try and get people to vote tactically. Now, tactical voting means voting for the party most likely to beat the party that you really don't want to win in your town. That's the reality of voting in the UK, because our first past the post system means that only one party can win in your constituency. So often, parties with similar policies end up knocking each other out. Because if one left-wing party gets, say, 25% of the vote, another left-wing party gets 35%, but the right-wing party gets 40%, then the people living in that town will get a right-wing MP, even though 60% of them wanted left-wing policies. Voting tactically would have meant that all the 60% that voted for left-wing parties would have all got behind the party that ended up with 35% because it had the best chance of winning. So in 2019, that meant voting for the party that was most likely to beat the Tories in your area, because Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, Greens, Plaid Cymru were all offering a second referendum. And so Starmer agreed to do a video with me supporting that, but he immediately defaulted to, because Labour is the only party offering a second referendum. And so I had to stop him and redo it, but what he said to me when I explained how he got it wrong really stuck with me. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're too tribal." Now, I wasn't sure whether that meant, yeah, sorry, that's our natural instinct, but I know we need to fight that instinct in order to work together so that we can defeat right-wing politics. Or, yeah, sorry, that's just who we are. Because the latter is what I saw throughout that election, with constant sniping between the Lib Dems and Labour, which meant that even though over 52% of the vote went to parties offering a second referendum, hell, even just Lib Dems and Labour alone had more votes than the Tories still got a stonking majority of seats in Parliament, because that's how our system works. Which means that it was tribalism among opposition parties that led to Brexit. And it's that same disgusting tribalism that got me kicked out of the Labour Party. I joined straight after the election, and because I've been party neutral up to that point, I figured that might disappoint some of my followers. And so I tweeted, "To any Lib Dems and Greens who are disappointed that I joined the Labour Party, my main aim is getting Labour to commit to electoral reform and an electoral pact. So if I'm successful, then at the following election, your party's votes will really count for the first time ever. I.e., it's the single best thing I could possibly do to support other opposition parties. Because if we make it so that all votes count equally, then our progressive voting country will finally be reflected in Parliament, because it won't just be Tory and Labour votes that count." But a month and a half later, at 1 AM in the morning, just hours after Boris Johnson announced the first national lockdown, I got an email from the Labour Party telling me they were kicking me out over that tweet. They accused me of joining the Labour Party because it's the single best thing I could possibly do to help other opposition parties. Which is not what I said at all. I said that me joining Labour and getting them to support equal voting would help other opposition parties. But Labour was so tribal that simply acknowledging that an equal voting system would help other parties too was seen as an act of betrayal worthy of immediate expulsion from the party. Now, Corbyn was still leader at the time, and so I figured, fine, Corbyn loyalists hate me because people like me wouldn't let him keep supporting Brexit. But he's on his way out, so maybe once he's gone, Labour will be better. That's why I reached out to Owen Jones to see if he was with me and tried to make Labour better, and he basically told me to go fuck myself. And when I tried to apply again under Keir Starmer, they never got back to me, which makes sense given that Keir Starmer's now come out against fair voting. And that's despite the members of the Labour Party voting overwhelmingly for electoral reform at the last Labour conference, and despite Starmer himself promising it when he was campaigning to be leader of the Labour Party. Which tells me all I need to know. He is too tribal, and he's perfectly okay with that. The mere possibility of him gaining absolute power under the first past the post voting system, even if it consistently spits out Tory governments, even if it means most votes never count, is worth it to him so long as he never has to share power with any other party. That is a fundamental opposition to democracy right there. Not just the democracy of his party, which he's overruling, but the democracy of the country. Because the winning party almost never gets a majority of the votes, but they always get a controlling majority in Parliament, so he wants to be able to do whatever he wants without having to even consult the parties that most voters chose. And he wants that despite the polls consistently showing that the majority of the British public want to change to a voting system where all votes count equally. That is a triple violation of democracy. So on both occasions that I met Keir Starmer, he raised huge red flags, and everything I've seen him do since has only confirmed those fears. And there's no excuse for this, because as I said in the very first video I made after we lost the election, we have the numbers. We are a progressive country, but our system won't let us show that. The majority of voters have chosen parties to the left of the Tories in all but 3 elections since World War II. We are a progressive voting country. Which means that if opposition parties don't try to win in the towns where a different opposition party would have a better chance of beating the Tories, then every progressive vote will count. And so we'll get the Tories out and deliver a voting system that allows our progressive voting country to finally be reflected in Parliament forever. Which means that if Starmer followed that plan, he wouldn't have to go borderline Tory to guarantee that he wins. And by going so far to the right, Keir Starmer is actually putting off a lot of Labour voters. So what do we do with that, given that we have to get the Tories out if we're going to save the country, but Keir Starmer is literally the leader of the opposition? For starters, let's take advantage of his character flaws. One of the reasons people don't trust him is because he's abandoned all the pledges that he made when he was trying to become Labour leader. Because in his head, convincing Labour members to vote for him and convincing the country to vote for him are two different things. And so he dropped all his promises to Labour as soon as he became Labour leader. So there's a strong argument that we can actually count on his amoral flexibility to get him to do the right things when he takes power. For example, we'll still have a poverty crisis when he takes power, and so he'll be facing a country all looking to him to make things better after 13 years of Tory shithousery. And probably the biggest lever that he can pull to improve the economy will be to join the single market of the EU, so he might just do that on pure self-preservation alone. And the louder we scream that, the faster it'll happen. On proportional voting, he might feel he has to support PR if he doesn't get an overall majority at the next election and has to power share with the Lib Dems, who might demand that in exchange for their support. But beware that he might try and call another election immediately just to try and improve his majority. So it's going to be our job to make sure that everybody knows that his continued support for our current voting system makes him an anti-democratic piece of shit. We need to make it politically toxic not to support fair voting. But ultimately, it's about Labour members, because that's the only real difference between the Tory party and the Labour party right now. The Tory and Labour leadership can both get in the bin as far as I'm concerned. But while the members of the Tory party are literally the worst people in the country, with 63% of them being against the idea of redistributing wealth to help the poorest people in society, and half of them thinking that Islam is a threat, Labour members share the values of the progressive majority of the UK, which means we can actually work with them. Which is why, in our current two-party system, Labour is the only viable vehicle for change that we have. And those members will be on the front lines of actually holding Keir Starmer to account when he becomes Prime Minister. And I'm talking full-on mutiny, to the point of getting rid of him if he doesn't play ball. Because I know that many of you are holding your nose to keep the party together until we get the Tories out. But once that happens, it's going to be down to you to make sure we actually get a change of direction. That said, I will say this. We're not playing your games. Your little war between Starmerites and Corbynites, we don't care. Let me put it this way. I will never get back what I personally lost trying to get Corbyn to stop supporting Brexit. My mental health dropped to life-threatening levels. My physical health? I'll spare you the details. I gave up my job, my career, the friends I had in Vienna, the person I was seeing in Vienna. I came back to the UK, had no social life for 3 years. I was getting death threats constantly, all to try and prevent the excess poverty and death that Brexit has brought about. But Corbyn supported Brexit for 3 years and then struggled to win an election on the basis that maybe it shouldn't happen. So I have more reason to, let's say, strongly dislike the man than most, and you just heard me explain how I don't trust Keir Starmer either. So I have absolutely zero time for your factional wars. I don't care about either of them. So if you want to get rid of Keir Starmer, cool, do it. But it better be to replace him with somebody who will give us an equal voting system immediately. But if it's just to replace him with Corbyn 2.0 so that the party swings back towards the Brexit supporting part of the left, which will never win a majority and by the next election the Tories will be back in again, then you are the tribal fanatics that are exactly what is wrong with UK politics right now. We have to break the cycle. The Tories have been in power for 48 of the last 78 years, despite the majority consistently voting to the left of them. The system as it is just keeps spitting out governments that are more right-wing than the people they supposedly represent. And it will keep doing that until we, as the progressive majority, draw a line in the sand and say that we're not going to accept it anymore. Because it ruins everything. It means that our politicians never really reflect who we are as a society. It means that most people feel their votes don't count because they literally don't. It makes us more hostile towards each other because if only one party gets a say in government and only one candidate can win in your constituency, then anybody with an even slightly different point of view to you is an existential threat to your values. That's why we need the seats in Parliament to be divided up proportionally based on the percentage of the votes that each party gets in their region. For example, let's say the West Midlands, where I am, has 10 MPs. 10% of the West Midlands vote Green, 20% vote Lib Dem, and 30% vote Labour. Then the West Midlands would have 1 Green MP, 2 Lib Dem MPs, and 3 Labour MPs. Whereas under the current system, if 40% vote Tory in your town and none of the other parties get more than that, then you get a Tory MP and the remaining 60% of the votes are simply ignored. That's the current reality. That's how things have gone consistently since World War II. And it won't change until we make it change, until we make sure that any future Labour leader knows that they have no choice but to change it. Because I was rewatching The Walking Dead the other day and Rick said something that I think really applies to how our society has sat back and let this corrupt voting system ruin our lives for generations.
There was a rock in the road. People would just avoid it, but horses would break their legs on it and die. Wagon wheels would come off. People would lose the goods they'd be coming to sell. That's what happened to a little girl. She just sat there and cried, but she wondered why it was still there, for it to hurt someone else. So she dug at that rock in the road with her hands till they bled. When she was gonna fill it up, she saw something in it. It was a bag of gold. King put that rock in the road because he knew the person who dug it out, who did something, they deserved a reward. They deserve to have their life changed for the good.
We have a chance to get that rock out of the road, to end this abusive duopoly of Labour and the Tories, to make politicians finally fear the people, because there will be no such thing as safe seats or even safe votes, because we'll all have the option to vote for the parties whose policies we like the most, safe in the knowledge that our votes will actually count. Because the Labour Party membership is with us. They voted for a new system. The only thing in the way is Keir Starmer. Because on his current path, Keir Starmer will only ever be a caretaker Prime Minister. The real fight will be getting him to do what needs to be done, or replacing him when he takes power. So what do you need to do for now? Keep an eye on tactical voting groups like the Movement Forward so that you know where best to place your vote at the next election to get the Tories out. But also keep an eye on Make Votes Matter and Labour for a New Democracy so that you know what people are doing to get our leaders to give us a fair voting system so that you never have to vote tactically again. Have a great week.